HP's back with the Victus 16 for 2023, and this year they've made a few niceties here. Let's talk about what some of these changes are. We'll look at the laptop, look at the specs, talk about the CPU and gaming performance, as well as the display and other essentials of a laptop and the laptop experience. And we'll summarize at the end by summarizing what the three nice things are about this particular laptop that HP really pushes ahead of the competition. So stay until the very end to hear my conclusions, in particular here are the three things that I believe are the niceties here that basically mark this laptop as a budget contender for laptop of the year, in my opinion. So stay tuned till the conclusion to hear that, and let's jump into the review. Notably on the specs for this Victus 16 is the i5-13500H. This is a much lower part than the higher end HX series from Intel for the 13th generation Raptor Lake mobile CPUs this year. So this one is still running the Alder Lake variety and basically tops out at 12 cores and 16 threads, which is still a bump up from the 6 cores and 12 threads of yesterday, particularly the i5s. So that's a nice little spec bump there. We've got 16 gigs of dual channel onboard RAM. HP didn't go with the fastest here, the 5600 megahertz, but rather it's a little bit down the middle, 5200, and not the lowest down the stack, which is 4800 megahertz. So I guess that's decent for the price there, considering this is a budget oriented machine. We've got 512 gigs of Gen 4 SSD, thankfully. And we've got a 16.1 inch FHD 144 hertz screen. It gets the job done. 300 nits is fairly, run of the mill in terms of brightness for these displays, particularly for an indoor settings. And 100% sRGB gives you enough color that you can enjoy games without not having it look too washed out. That 4050 with the 6 gigs, however, it does hit that 120 watt max TGP, but only in benchmarks. And I believe that 6 gigabyte is barely enough for any modern games. Older games do well and they run with pretty high frame rates, but if anything, within the last year or perhaps even this year, any of the AAA titles, you'll be needing a lot more RAM, VRAM, or you'll be turning down the settings from ultra down to perhaps high or maybe even medium to get sustainable and basically stable frame rates in your gaming. That's rounded out by Gigabit Ethernet, Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.3. HP decided to skip with the Intel chips and went with Mediatek instead. We missed Wi-Fi 6E here. Instead, we get just the basic Wi-Fi 6, single zone backlit keyboard, a 720p 30fps webcam. However, I've seen in the specs 1080p, and I've seen on other sites 720p, so I'm not sure which it really is. But that is the webcam there, 70 watt hours battery, and about 230 watts power adapter, weighing in just slightly over 5 pounds. This device sells at $16.99, but if you look around, I've seen regular sales on this device all the way down to $13.99, $14.99, even $12.99, which is the price point at which I picked this laptop up from Best Buy Canada. So please keep an eye out for sales, and particularly more so along the holiday season now that we're getting into. So let's jump in here and let's look at the CPU performance, and we'll talk about gaming and so on. All right, as we take a look at the top of this device here, this is a plastic cover. It is not made of aluminum. It doesn't feel cheap, but I mean, it's pretty okay for the class of the device that we're looking at. We've got some 16 engineered by HP branding here. We've got some Victus branding on the back, and of course the V for Victus here. And I think pretty classy looking cover here. Nothing really to complain about. I don't think this would look odd in an office, as it's kind of a multi-purpose, use all around laptop in the budget category. I think this is actually a pretty good look. So well done, HP. I think that's a great job done. Looking at the front lip of this device, it's a nice little place for you to dig in your fingers here. So thank you for that nice little touch, HP. Moving around to the left hand side of the device, we've got a combo microphone headphone jack, some venting here for exhaust. We've got a USB 3.2 Gen 1. But Type A, but 5 gigabits per second port. Of course, this is a budget-oriented laptop, so I guess HP decided to skimp a few pennies here rather than give us the latest 3.2 Gen 2 standard, which would be 10 gigabits per second. This is still stuck on 5 gigabits per second, but alas, it's nice to have some USB-A ports. And of course, we have here a pull-down Ethernet RJ45 gigabit port. It is not 2.5 gigabits, it's only 1000 megabits or gigabit. On the back of the device, we really have nothing, just a bunch of exhausting here and some heat sinks inside the device. And you can see the little bit of Victus branding here as it's tapered towards the back of this device. And finally, over on the right hand side, we've got a barrel power port. This is a typical power port. We've got an HDMI 2.1 port that's connected directly to the RTX 4050 in this laptop. We've got an additional Type A USB 3.2, again Gen Gen 1 5 gigabits per second ports. And we've got finally here also another USB 3.2 Gen 1 port, although this is a USB Type-C plug. So this one will basically do your alt, DisplayPort alt, and also your USB-C charging if you need to in a pinch with this particular port here. It is not Thunderbolt 4 port, despite us having an Intel CPU in this device. This one is running the i5-13500H. And on the bottom of this device, we've got some fans here. There's two fans visible in this particular device. We've got some heat pipes that are shared between the CPU and the GPU. It seems to handle fairly well. The fan noise is of course there because then they get close to 6,000 RPM when they spin at their max levels. But that said, they do seem to keep the thermals under check, and you can comfortably play on this device without getting into that 100 degrees. And of course, you know, that's to be expected considering this is not as thin a device as you would see on some other devices. The tapering here really kind of hides away the depth and the actual thickness of this particular device. But that said, I believe this is sufficient capacity to cool this type of CPU with a 4050 at about 120 watts TGP here in this particular device and in this particular chassis. So we'll talk more about thermals a little bit later. We'll talk more about fan noise a little bit later as well. And we'll finally get into some of the gaming performance that you can expect out of this HP Victus 16 included with the RTX 4050. One other quirk about this particular laptop is the USB Type-C port is on the right-hand side of this device and about halfway down the device width. So when you're using your mouse hand here, and if you have the device pretty close to you, as I sometimes like to do, or particularly when you're in laptop mode on your lap, then your mouse hand will basically interfere. You'll run into this cable all the time. Usually USB Type-C cables are a little bit thicker, so this could be a particular issue. And the biggest change HP made this year is that, you know, the edges are now rounded. Thank you very much for that, HP. In the previous years, these were very sharp corners, you know, almost point-like. And if you dug your heel into them, or your palm into them, sorry, or into your elbow, or into your arm while you were carrying them, they did leave quite a bit of mark, and they're uncomfortable, basically, to say the least. The edges of the device are sharp. I wish they would round these devices, as I've seen now on the HP, or excuse me, the Lenovo Yoga 9i something or rather. I'm not sure. You know, I did see that on one of the Lenovo laptops this year, so that's a very nice feature. You know, iPhone is doing that too with their latest iPhone 15 from Apple. They've kind of slightly rounded the edges to, you know, have them less sharp and dig into you, because if you have your arm here for a while and you're gaming, you're gonna eventually be, because you kind of get into it and you start to press down on your device, you will end up with markings. You will end up with markings across your wrist there, and that's not pleasant for anybody. So if we can do away with that, I think that would basically take the device construction and the actual materials and the feel of the device to a whole nother level. But I think this is a pretty good keyboard. I don't really have anything to complain about. I'd rather have the arrow keys smaller and, you know, basically separated than be blended into the keyboard and be full size, because then it's harder to navigate, or especially if they're abbreviated and kind of shoved in behind the shift key here, that makes it a little bit difficult to access it with just, you know, touch typing, because this is what I'm used to from laptops. From using laptops for the last 20 years or so. So that said, overall pretty good keyboard. It does have a backlight, although you can use the FN and 4 key to activate. It's only one level and it's blue, I believe, slightly blue. Yeah, it's blue tinted and it turns on and off. That's about it. There's no brightness levels or whatnot. In a pinch situation, it really gets the job done here. In addition, there's a few other kind of key features of this particular keyboard. The power button is here tucked in besides the delete key. I have not had any issues with activating this or accidentally pressing it. And even if you do, it doesn't do anything by default. Of course, you can go into Windows and tweak that behavior if you do want it to actually work with just single taps. In addition, you've got an Omen key here, which launches the HP Omen software, which is used to administer this laptop. You've got a quick handy shortcut here for calculator. So just a few nice additives that HP has provided for us. As for the touchpad on this particular laptop, it is not a glass surface. HP calls this the HP image pad with multi-touch gesture support, and multi-touch gestures for all intents and purposes do activate very well. I have not had a lot of issues with accidental touches or accidental activation, so from that perspective it's okay. It's smooth, there is no rough surface, so you're not scratching if you feels like that. As far as the drivers, they are not Windows Precision drivers, but rather supplied by Synaptics, as this is a Synaptics touchpoint device. But I think that's basically all there is to say about it. Nothing spectacular, but again, nothing really to complain about. HP always does the basics pretty well, and I think on this laptop, they've hit the nail on the head as well. Looking at the storage, luckily HP has not skimped on us with an SK Hynix 512GB SSD of the PCIe Gen 4 variety, an NVMe drive that's plenty fast. And if we look at the performance numbers on this drive, they're actually quite staggering. We're hitting the theoretical limits for the read speed, particularly at 7,000 megabytes per second, and write speed is not far behind at 5,000 megabytes per second. A very good performer overall. The only downside is that HP has only provided one SSD slot, so if you were to upgrade, you have to remove this drive, reinstall a new drive, and then update your Windows. And a quick tidbit about the communications on this particular laptop: it includes both Wi-Fi 6 by courtesy of Mediatek. We've got a Mediatek MT7921 adapter here. I don't have a lot of experience with this particular adapter, but I assume it's a more budget-oriented offering since it doesn't include Wi-Fi 6E, which is the latest Wi-Fi standard. Of course, Wi-Fi 7 is right around the corner, so to not have Wi-Fi 6E is a little bit of a letdown, but I can understand that this is a budget-oriented laptop. And of course, unless you have the proper equipment with Wi-Fi 6E support to be able to take care of these or take advantage of these speeds, you're not really going to get any benefit from having Wi-Fi 6E support on board, but no other equipment in your house to really build up a Wi-Fi 6E network. That said, we've got Bluetooth on board. We've got version 5.3 on this particular laptop, so kudos to HP for doing that. We've got the latest spec of Bluetooth, which means we're going to get low energy support, and we're going to get a lot of the TWS or the true wireless headphones that will work a lot longer without actually using up a lot of battery life on this particular laptop. We also have Realtek Gigabit Ethernet control on board, so that's built into this laptop with a little flip down switch as we looked earlier. So that basically rounds out the communications offerings. Nothing spectacular, nothing to complain about. It works as intended. Haven't had any issues with Bluetooth, with Wi-Fi, or with Ethernet. So job well done. This is a webcam test of the HP Victus 16 for 2023 featuring the RTX 4050. So this is a little bit of a new design. Some, tweaks have been made to this particular laptop, but unfortunately the webcam is still stuck at 720p. I don't know why HP felt that that's something that they needed to do, considering it probably shaves off $2 or $3, I believe, versus the 1080p sensors that are basically standard now on all laptops this year, considering many people are still working from home or working in hybrid mode. That said, HP says that this includes some temporal noise reduction. For what it's worth, you'll be the judge of that, so let me know in the comments below. As well as for the audio, there's dual array microphones on board, so that should help with a little bit of noise cancellation, or rather noise isolation, in a busy environment, in a busy office, without disturbing your neighbors or catching their audio while they're talking in the background. So let me know what you think of this video quality and the audio quality on the built-in microphones and the built-in webcam on this HP Victus 16. The other handy feature is that there is a shutter. It's a physical sliding shutter that you can slide like so to turn off the webcam, and then sliding it back on will re-enable the webcam so that you can basically keep your privacy when you're not using the webcam. That's a nice touch. Thanks very much for that, HP. The Victus 16 is equipped with a 70 watt-hour battery and comes equipped with a 230 watt AC power adapter that can quick charge the battery from 0 to 50% in about 30 minutes. So that means with the brightness turned down a little bit to about 70% and Bluetooth turned off, you should be able to get about 6 hours of mixed use on this particular laptop. If you stretch that a little bit by just using video or just reading content online, you should be able to get close to 7 hours, perhaps even more than 7 hours, depending on what you're running, how many apps are running in the background, how many windows and tabs you have open, etc., and how much ramming is being used. But overall, a very good performer in the battery life department. So if you need something that's portable and can get work done away from the wall, you're going to be looking at this device as a contender. All right, and looking at the display on this particular laptop, so we've got a 1080p 16:9 aspect ratio display on this particular Victus 16. This is a 300 nits brightness display. That means you're not going to win any awards in terms of the brightness department, nor are you going to be seeing any HDR content on here. There is no no advertised HDR support whatsoever, and understandably so. At 300 nits, you're not even at the bare minimum level of brightness required to hit HDR support, which is 400 nits. And 400 nits, believe me, is not any kind of an HDR experience to rave about. At the minimum, you need about 1,000 nits before you can really start to say, yes, we're getting into HDR territory. That said, though, 300 nits is sufficient for indoor use, and it's an all-around budget status quo for brightness on many laptops and monitors, so can't complain too much about that. It is color accurate, though. It's 100% sRGB, so at least kudos to HP for doing that and not giving us one of those really gimped and really low color gamut displays, because that really affects the gaming experience when your colors look all dull and washed out. That said, there is no representation here from any 16:10 aspect ratios. This is a traditional 16:9, and that's totally fine considering 1080p is the way to go. And many games support 1080p, 1440p, and 4K, which is 2160p. So those are all multiples of each other, and this is going to run great. Because this is a 1080p display, though, you're going to have about 70-80% to almost half the pixel density that you would of a 2K 1600p or even a much less than a 4K display. So that said, it's easier to drive, and you'll see some really nice frame rates, particularly if you can turn on DLSS in games that support it in, as well as frame generation, and you'll get some smooth gameplay experience on this at 1080p. I've tried Lies of P, Starfield, and a few other games on here. My benchmarking, it was really a lovely experience. Now, keep in mind, some of the games like this, if you put it into Ultra or some of the very high presets, you're going to have issues with running into VRAM limits, which means you're going to get some stutter as you get texture loading, texture popping happening, and that stutter sometimes can really bring you down into the single digits. So if you want to have a smooth gaming experience, stick to medium. High settings, try Ultra. If you get any of those stuttery effects, drop it down a preset level, and you should be able to get gaming on this display just fine. So that said, I think that's all really to say about the display here. Pretty good, nothing to complain about, very status quo, but thanks for the 100% sRGB and for the 144 Hertz, we can do high refresh rate gaming out of the box on this budget device. Looking at the CPU benchmarks here, a quick thing worth pointing out is the 13508, which is the mainstream parts for Intel mobile laptops, versus the i9 13900HX, which are the higher class 55 watt plus series, often shows a 2-to-1 or half the performance of the 13900HX and the i9. That said, though, the i5 13500H only comes with 12 cores and 16 threads, versus the higher equipped i9 13900HX at 24 cores and 32 threads, for delivering almost double the performance of 13500H. The HP Victus 16 provides 3 different performance modes out of the box using the HP Omen software, and those performance modes are Performance, Balanced, and Eco mode. Now, there is a little bit of variation on the performance and the balanced mode in that you can control the fan speed. So you can go between the auto fans, you can go to max fans, and there's also a custom fan profile, which allows you to basically adjust the RPM for the fans themselves. But, with the eco mode itself, the fan speed is not adjustable. The system automatically decides what is the fan speed. It's actually quite low. But that said, if we look at the noise level here, we're getting between 52 decibels at the highest end with performance mode and maximum fans, to a ever so slight drop to auto fans mode in performance mode, with the RPMs ramping down just ever so slightly from 5900 RPM at the high end to 5700 RPM on the auto fans mode. Down to jumping into balance mode, we get a significant drop in noise level down to 43.5 decibels at only 3900 RPM, a much more playable and much more comfortable gaming experience in my opinion. And then finally, if we drop down to eco mode, we get down to 38 decibels. Now, considering that the ambient noise level in the room where this was tested was around 38 decibels, this is actually almost near silent. The fans do still spin at 2500 RPM. They are audible, but you really have to focus or put your ear next to the laptop in order to hear any noise whatsoever. If you're looking at just noise at ear level, it's practically silent for all intents and purposes. As for the thermal performance on this particular device, we saw temperatures between 71 degrees Celsius and 79.2 degrees Celsius on both the CPU and the GPU. Thermal testing was done using the Farmark benchmark, which was run in 30 minutes in performance mode with max fans selected. And this basically peaked at 120 watts as specified by HP. The 4050 here can reach up to 120 watts of max TGP, but the sustained performance was right around 109 watts actually in this particular benchmark. Keep in mind that actual gaming performance will be a little bit lower and not 109 watts. It'll be right around 100 watts or maybe even 90 watts. And that said, the GPU clocks reached around 2250 megahertz, and the WASD keys with thermal testing was between 36.4 and 39.3 degrees Celsius. So nothing very hot, but also nothing nice and cool either. It's somewhere in between, slightly warm to the touch, but nothing that's going to singe your fingers or be discomfortable in the long run. All right, as we take a look at some of these gaming benchmarks here, what we see is a trend that predominantly means that using DLSS 3 and frame generation, all of these games tested on the RTX 4050 in this particular HP Victus 16 managed to stay well above a 60 FPS average at 1080p. Now, keep in mind that 1080p resolution versus 1440p, which I've been testing thus far on many of the 4060 and higher equipped laptops, is a 70%, 70 to 80% almost difference in the pixel density. So going from about 2 million pixels to 2560 by 1600, which is a Quad HD plus resolution, you're looking at a difference of nearly another 2 million pixels. So it's understandable then that these frames would be, or the frame rates for the average numbers here would be much higher in these games, despite looking like being higher numbers than what you'd see with the 4060. If you paired the 4060, of course, with a 1080p screen, you see a much different result. However, there is one thing to note here, which isn't working particularly in the favor of the 4050. One is you see a lot of these minimums down into the single digits, or in one case, near zero. Also, the 1% lows in some of these games that are particularly taxing, such as this one, for example, Hogwarts Legacy, jumps all the way down to 5 frames per second. Now, my intuition says that this is due to the RAM limitation, the VRAM limitation. So the RTX 4050 only comes equipped with 6 gigs of RAM, which I believe in today's modern games. And if you look at these, Lies of P, for example, Hogwarts Legacy, these are all very much up-to-date games that require at least 8 gigabytes of VRAM to really run smoothly. So that said, not having that extra RAM to account for the higher resolution textures and the game loading and streaming, a lot of that was due to stuttering in some cases because of texture load in. There was some texture pop in that was visible effects. But overall, if you're looking to play games with the RTX 4050, you're definitely going to need to stick to a 1080p resolution, enable DLSS 3 and frame generation, and you'll have an awesome time in pretty much every game that you can throw at this laptop and that 4050. And a quick word here about the HP Omen Gaming Hub. So this is pretty much unchanged since the beginning of the year, as I reviewed on the HP Omen on the 17 with the RTX 4090 in it. So basically we've got a few tabs here. There's system vitals, and you can go into an advanced mode or a basic mode here to see what some of the RAM utilization, CPU and GPU are. Also with temperatures, that's very handy, thanks to HP. A network booster to do some optimization if you're doing competitive gaming and you have lag issues. There's also lighting where you can control the lighting, but because this is just a single zone, you can't really do all that much. And of course, performance control is where the best fun is. So performance mode allows you to do max fans, auto fans, or manual fans. Now, somebody had asked a question about this software early on. The manual fan has a floor. You cannot go all the way down to as much as you'd like. But enabling this to dynamic sets it to this particular graph mode, and here you can drag it all the way down to 0, but if you see, it'll pop immediately back up to the base mode, which is the same as this lock here. So HP does give you control over the fan curve, but in a limited sense. If you use auto and max, I found that the actual difference in the cooling performance is very minimal. As I mentioned in my thermals review, it's 5900 RPM versus about 5700 RPM. So not that much of a difference, but auto mode just keeps the laptop as quiet as possible, as often as possible, depending on what the CPU and GPU temps are. Balance mode is, of course, a great way to play. It cuts the power a little bit to that GPU, but it keeps your system nice and cool and quiet, and your temps are a little higher as a trade-off, but you can game comfortably in this mode without annoying all of your neighbors if you're in an office setting, or if you're in your dorm and you don't want to annoy your roommate. rates. Eco mode switches it down to a very low power mode. I don't recommend gaming in this mode, but it is there if you want to prolong your battery life. So if you're trying to get the best, out of your battery life on this laptop, make sure you stay in eco mode and to turn off all of the fans and stuff. When you do switch to eco mode, you will see that the screen flashes as it flickers into this mode. And now you'll see this here that thermal management is not allowed, as the system automatically tunes it down to 2500 RPM, near silent. But this is the best mode for getting the best out of the battery life. Now, this does not have a mux, but it does have this hybrid, or excuse me, this does not have advanced Optimus, but it does have a mux for hybrid and discrete graphics switching. So you could do that in here, but this will basically stay in hybrid mode unless you have a particular reason to get into discrete mode. I found that doesn't offer you as much of a performance boost as you would think. Other than that, there's a bunch of other stuff in here for the Omen to be configured, but a lot of these things I find them to be superfluous, and now HP's looks like it's adding more and more junk here, gallery deals. Like, why is that really necessary in the HP Omen Gaming Hub? There is also controller support, so that's a nice thing you can have. You can go in here and configure all your social media logins and all your gaming logins. Plus, there's also a notifications here, which just basically shows you what's new in the Omen Gaming Hub, and some settings. But this really doesn't really do all that much. And then, of course, you can set up a profile here if you have multiple HP devices, or if you're going to save all of your configurations and tweaks to come back and to be able to recover them. Overall, pretty decent software. We have some level of control over the system itself, but I don't see any ability to undervolt or overclock, because the 13500H does not support any undervolting. It is a locked CPU, and I believe the same goes for the RTX 4050 here. We're not able to do any overclocking on that GPU, at least from within the Omen Gaming Hub. All right, now let's conclude this review with the 3 things that I believe HP has really done right with this Victus 16 to really knock it out of the ballpark and to make this an excellent contender versus the Slim 5 or from some of the Lenovo offerings, particularly in the budget category right under the $1,500 mark. Also contender to this would be the Asus TUF F15, and I believe this one wins it, in terms of the display department. We've got a 16.1-inch screen versus a 15.6. That's another half an inch. It makes 1080p, I think, that much more comfortable to work at for longer periods of time without introducing eye strain. The display hits 100% sRGB. It's 300 nits. It's nice enough. There is some backlight bleed, but it's nothing that's significant once you're in a game or consuming content, except if you're watching movies that are very, very dark. You'll notice a little bit of graying, but nothing to really hamper that experience, I would say, overall. The price point is very good. It sells for $16.99. That's the MSRP, but you can often find this down well below that. $400, $300 off is very common for this particular laptop, so shop around and hunt around for those deals. In addition, the 4050 at 6 gigabytes and 1080p resolution really delivers. You get basically 60 plus average frame rates in just about any single game that you can. And if you need that extra boost, you can enable DLSS, you can enable FSR2 where it's supported, and you can also even enable frame generation where it's available to really help kick that frame rate up. And if you want to play any game that's modern, you can play it at basically high settings or higher, depending on what the VRAM limit will be hit. So play around with that a lot. If you get some stutter at ultra settings, try dropping it down to high or perhaps even medium, depending on how taxing the game is on this particular GPU. But that said, excellent display, excellent battery life actually for this class of laptop. It's a great all-around budget hit in my opinion, and the 4050 has plenty of oomph to game in with anything that's come out this year or perhaps even the next year or so at high, maybe medium settings as this pushes out into the timeline there into 2025 or into 2026. That said, I would highly recommend this laptop if you're considering something that can do everything, kind of an all-arounder. I love the keyboard, no smushed keys on the right hand side. Battery life is great, size is great, weight is great. The only thing I would have perhaps hoped for this particular laptop is again for the keyboard to be centered, and maybe a 4060 at that price range, about the $1,200 to $1,300 price range, would really knock it out of the park there. But I think 1080p 450 is an excellent match. DLSS 3 delivers for days, and frame generation is just icing on that cake. So if you need a gaming laptop that can do everything, that you can take to school, get all your work done, when you have some time from between classes, get a Fortnite session or some Apex Legends in there, this is a win. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed my content. Please subscribe to my channel and share my content across your social media channels if you enjoyed this content. All of this content is made possible by my personal pocketbook, so any attempt at sharing my content to help this channel grow is much appreciated. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.